What made the A6M Zero both the most feared fighter in the skies and a ticking time bomb for the pilots who flew it? Discover the untold story of Japan's iconic plane that went from ruling the air to becoming a pilot's worst nightmare. The Zero wasn't just a plane, it was a statement. When it appeared in the skies, it immediately forced the world to rethink the limits of aerial combat. A sleek powerhouse that could outrun, outmaneuver, and outlast most of its opponents, it symbolized Japan's relentless push for dominance in the Pacific. Even before the United States entered the war, whispers about this so-called unstoppable fighter had reached Allied intelligence. Reports claimed it racked up a staggering kill ratio of 12-1 against Chinese aircraft, a number so intimidating it bordered on myth. This wasn't propaganda. The Zero soon proved itself a nightmare for Allied pilots. It was fast, nimble, and deadly accurate in dogfights. Compact yet efficient, it left its adversaries struggling to keep up. On paper, the Zero was extraordinary. But extraordinary doesn't always mean invincible. By the later years of the war, the Zero story took a tragic turn. What started as a symbol of aerial supremacy ended as an expendable tool of desperation. The very same aircraft that had conquered skies now carried out kamikaze missions, a bitter testament to shifts in Japan's fortunes. How could a fighter so feared, so revered, fall from grace so completely? This is the paradox that makes the Zero both fascinating and chilling. The Zero's dominance wasn't a result of mere coincidence. It was the culmination of bold engineering decisions and innovative design. Tasked with creating a fighter that could operate across the vast oceanic landscapes of the Pacific, Mitsubishi's lead designer, Jiro Horikoshi, faced a monumental challenge. Range, speed, and maneuverability were the priorities. Sacrifices had to be made, but they resulted in one of the most agile fighters of its era. The Zero's stunning 1,900-mile range wasn't just impressive, it was revolutionary. No Allied aircraft could match this capability in the early stages of the war. It gave Japan the ability to project power deep into enemy territory, striking where its opponents least expected. This long reach, combined with a top speed of roughly 330 miles per hour, made the Zero an apex predator in the Pacific's sprawling theater of war. Weight was the key to the Zero's advantage. Engineers used advanced aluminum alloys to trim every ounce from the design. Stripped of heavy armor and utilizing a lightweight frame, the aircraft tipped the scales at under 4,400 pounds. This allowed it to dart through the air and outflank enemy planes with surgical precision. A powerful 940 horsepower Nakajima Sake 12 engine propelled the Zero to heights Allied pilots could only dream of at the time. But there was a dark side to this pursuit of lightweight perfection. The lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks turned the Zero into a fragile masterpiece. A single hit could explode its fuel tank or even shatter vital components, a flaw Allied pilots would later exploit mercilessly. While it reigned supreme early in the war, this fragility came to haunt Japanese aviators who piloted the Zero into increasingly hostile skies. Despite its flaws, the Zero carried an impressive arsenal. 2 wing-mounted 20mm cannons and twin 7.7mm machine guns in the cowling ensured it would tear through enemy aircraft. This combination of speed, firepower, and agility made it a terror in the early years of the war. It was a finely crafted blade, but one that could break too easily under pressure. The Zero burst onto the scene over China in 1940, where it effectively rewrote the rules of aerial combat. Chinese and Soviet fighters were ruthlessly outclassed by its speed and agility. For the next year, it operated with an aura of invincibility, dominating the skies wherever it appeared. But its true moment of notoriety came on December 7, 1941. during Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. The Zero spearheaded the offensive, providing critical fighter escort for bombers as they devastated the U.S. Pacific Fleet. With its unparalleled range and sharp reflexes, it neutralized American defenses before they had a chance to gain traction. A handful of P-40 Warhawks and P-36 Hawks scrambled to defend the skies, but these were no match for the speed and lethality of the Zero. U.S. pilots quickly found themselves outflown and outgunned. The attack was an overwhelming success for Japan, but it also foreshadowed the deadlier aerial battles to come. The Zero's dominance continued through 1942. Skirmishes in Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean saw the fighter obliterate its competitors. Even legendary British Hurricanes, which had been pivotal in the defense of Britain, struggled to counter the Zero's agility. Japan appeared unstoppable, with Zeros sweeping Allied forces from the skies. Critical to its success was the caliber of the pilots who flew it. Japanese naval aviators were among the best trained in the world, enduring a grueling selection process and rigorous training programs that emphasized not just technical proficiency, but also combat tactics. Their skill made the Zero almost unbeatable in the air. Early on, the combination of elite pilots and elite aircraft created a deadly synergy that left Allied forces scrambling for answers. However, cracks in this seemingly unbreachable armor would soon emerge. Tactics and engineering alone couldn't sustain dominance indefinitely, but for a brief, electrifying period during the early war, the Zero was an irresistible force, painting the Pacific skies with a reputation that would endure long past the war's end. The invincible reputation of the Zero didn't last forever. By mid-1942, the cracks started to show. At the pivotal Battle of Midway, the Zero went toe-to-toe with Allied forces that were getting smarter and better equipped. Enter the Thatch Weave, a brilliant defensive maneuver pioneered by U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander John Thatch. This tactic used teamwork to counter the Zero's head-spinning agility. Two aircraft flying together would intersect paths, leaving the pursuing Zero directly in the sights of a teammate's guns. It was simple, effective, and exposed a critical flaw in the Zero's dominance. Then came the Akutan Island discovery, a game-changing moment for Allied forces. An almost intact Zero, downed in the Aleutian Islands, was recovered by U.S. forces. Engineers eagerly studied the aircraft, dissecting every piece to understand its strengths and weaknesses. What they found confirmed their hopes and suspicions. At high speeds, the Zero's controls, especially its ailerons, stiffened, crippling its precision. More astonishingly, it had no protective armor for fuel tanks or the pilot. A single well-placed bullet could turn the mighty Zero into a fiery wreck. This newfound intelligence became the foundation for Allied counter-strategies. Pilots were instructed to avoid dogfights, where the Zero excelled, and instead focus on long-range engagements and high-speed dives. Coupled with this tactical evolution came an increase in airframe survivability in the new Allied aircraft. For the Zero, the skies were becoming less forgiving. By 1943, the war changed decisively, and so did the skies. The Zero, once untouchable, found itself outperformed by a new generation of Allied aircraft. Planes like the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, the Vought F-4U Corsair, and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning weren't just catching up. They were leaving the Zero in the dust. The Hellcat particularly was designed with the Zero in mind. Heavily armored, powered by a beastly radial engine, and carrying an arsenal of firepower, it was everything the Zero was not. The Zero's performance didn't falter only due to better enemy planes. While Allies progressed with cutting-edge technologies, Japan seemed stuck in time with a design that barely evolved from the original 1939 blueprint. Despite repeated calls from the Imperial Navy for a successor, resources were stretched thin. Rival priorities in aircraft production, including commitments to bombers and other fighters, meant the development of the much-needed A6M Zero The Zero's intended replacement was endlessly delayed. By the time the Repute took its first flight in 1944, it was already obsolete. While aircraft production plateaued, Japan's real Achilles heel became devastatingly clear. The industrial base crumbled under the relentless Allied bombing campaigns, critically reducing manufacturing output. Valuable resources like aluminum and fuel became scarce. Meanwhile, skilled Japanese pilots, once idols of the skies, were being replaced by barely trained cadets. By 1944, Japan struggled to provide more than 40 hours of flight instruction compared to the United States average of 500 hours. These desperate limitations left the Zero not only outclassed, but also woefully undersupported. When innovation failed, desperation took its place. By late 1944, the Zero's role shifted to perhaps its most infamous legacy. Once a conqueror of the skies, the aircraft was now repurposed for Japan's kamikaze campaign. These suicide missions were born from dwindling resources and a grim determination to inflict maximum damage on Allied forces. The Zero, lightweight and equipped to carry a 250-kilogram bomb, became the tool of choice for these one-way missions. Fuel was hardly an issue since the pilots weren't coming back. The infamous tactic was introduced during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where kamikaze strikes dealt heavy damage to Allied naval forces. Zeros, once feared for their aerial dominance, was now feared as deadly guided missiles. The USS Bunker Hill became the starkest reminder of the effectiveness of these missions. Two Zeros slammed into the aircraft carrier, causing devastating fires and killing nearly 400 crew members. Despite isolated successes like this, the kamikaze campaign was not a sustainable strategy. Japan was throwing planes away it couldn't replace and pilots it could no longer effectively train. The losses outweighed the fleeting gains, and by mid-1945, the tactic was a grim hallmark of Japan's looming defeat. The Zero's story is one of remarkable highs and tragic lows. It began as a revolutionary force, dominating the skies with its agility and range, but it ended as a symbol of a nation stretched to its limits. Pilots once boasted of flying the Zero, yet by the end of the war, many cringed at the very thought of climbing into its fragile cockpit. By 1945, the Zero wasn't just outdated, it was a death trap. Against heavily armored Hellcats and Corsairs, it had virtually no chance of survival. The Zero's vulnerability underlined the cost of pushing performance at the expense of safety. Despite its decline, however, the Zero's legacy endures as one of the most iconic fighters in history. Its influence extended far beyond its service years, shaping aviation design philosophies for decades to come. Perhaps the most poignant lesson of the Zero lies in its paradox. It was almost perfect for its time, yet that very perfection sealed its fate. Innovation thrives when it's backed by flexibility and adaptability. The Zero represents a frozen moment in history where engineering genius met resource limitations and strategic errors. Today, the story of the Zero isn't just about its victories or failures. It's a reminder of the balance needed in any endeavor. The Zero dazzled the skies, defined an era, and ultimately fell victim to forces both external and of its own design. More than a machine, it became a poignant reminder of the fleeting nature of superiority in the relentless march of progress. The Zero's legacy is a stark reminder of how brilliance can come at a cost. Want to uncover more wartime innovations and untold aviation secrets? Hit that like button, subscribe to Tailwinds, and turn on notifications to never miss a story that soars.